George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
$3 trillion, T-trillion. It took 2 decades of war and occupation, countless dead, to replace the Taliban with the Taliban, the greatest achievement of the Western Empire so far. The UK and US forces lost thousands of their own men and even some women. To get the Taliban out and put the Taliban back in. You couldn't make it up. You couldn't make up the victory parade that is currently taking place on Bagram Air Base, the former torture chamber of the US-UK occupation of Afghanistan. All the captured American hardware is right now parading across Bagram Air Base. I'll tell you, you'd have to have a heart of stone not to laugh. It's difficult to laugh about Kursk because the Ukrainians are still dying there in large numbers. But historically, it will be seen as the most tragicomic farce of modern times, the day that Ukraine invaded Russia. And is this the night that the Middle East goes up fully in flames? You've come to the right place. If you want to find out, it's the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway. The mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway. The world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
I was going to talk about the Taliban, so I probably caught my editor off guard. He's probably not even looked out a single box wipe on that subject. But I just can't forswear to laugh at the victory there is. There's a victory parade with American weapons, materiel, trucks, armored personnel carriers, tanks, helicopter gunships, all of them left in Bagram by these scuttling American forces who stole out of Kabul like a thief in the night exactly 3 years ago. I'm not laboring the point out of any schadenfreude. What? I told you so. I told you it was going to end like that. I'm mentioning it because the rest of you have all forgotten it. Plainly, the Ministry of Defense in London, the Pentagon in Washington have forgotten what happened when Johnny Afghan, Tommy Taliban kicked their ass out of their country exactly 3 years ago. They must have forgotten about it, or they wouldn't be so gung-ho about the wars they're about to fight next, would they? If they had not forgotten that the ragged-assed, open-toed, sandal-wearing soldiers of the Taliban, that they fought for 20 years and had to scuttle, run under fire out of Afghanistan. They had to run away. The UK, the US, they ran away from Tommy Taliban. But they're ready to fight the Ruskies. They're ready to fight the Chinese. They're ready to fight the Iranians. That can only mean that, aided and abetted by an utterly compliant, bought and paid for media, that they have forgotten 3 years only just how unable they are any longer to invade, to occupy, to defeat the empire that they once bestrode their boots on the neck of the natives before the natives learned to fight back, before the natives were able to arm themselves, make their own arms, make their own weapons to fight back. And then G.I. Joe and Tommy Atkins don't like it up them much. They really, really don't. And their public, long ago tired of these forever wars that we have been fighting decade after decade, fighting and losing decade after decade. Angry? Moi? I only helped pay for the $3 trillion, and so did you. My compatriots' life's blood was spent in that ill-gotten enterprise, as was yours. The political leaders that I still have and you still have led us into that bloody imbroglio, one after the other. They've all forgotten. Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria. See how they all went so wrong. Try to remember, if you've got a lifetime longer than a gnat, you will remember what happened in these forever wars. I'm laboring this point, not because of the extraordinary parade that's taking place at Bagram, with weapons that the Americans had to leave because they had no time to pack, because the Taliban were coming back. They had to run away. I'm laboring it for this reason, because the Western Empire that ran away from Tommy Taliban, from Johnny Afghan, invaded Russia this week. Yes, they did. Not just their weapons, carried by unfortunate Ukrainians, most of whom are now dead, but their mercenaries, many of whom are still serving soldiers with the French army, with the British army, with the Polish army, with the American army, were amongst those sent on a fool's errand, not since the charge of the Light Brigade was there a more ill-considered political military maneuver than Ukraine invading Russia. At Kursk, of all places. Think of a place, now that Stalingrad no longer exists, at least under that name. Think of a place less auspicious for German tanks to invade Russia across. If you have any understanding of history at all, you'd immediately say Kursk. No, don't send German tanks to Kursk. Don't send German Leopards, Panzers. Don't send them to Kursk. Look up the books and see what happened last time. But they did it. In fact, the German War Ministry gloried in it. The chief of the German army, I told you, a German army was a bad idea. I told you a reunified Germany was a bad idea. The German War Ministry. They call it the Bundeswehr, but it's really the Bundesreich. It's really the Reichswehr that invaded Russia this week at Kursk. And of course, it has all gone horribly wrong. Worse than that, it has guaranteed that the hardest of hardliners, that the hardest political and military opinions in Moscow are now entirely vindicated. They're telling Putin he's been fighting this war with kid gloves, in soft shoes. And now it's about to get real. The Wehrmacht, as I will always call them, is already crushed in the Ukrainian invasion of Russia. And Russia is now going to go all the way. And I speak as someone who considered this war, when it started, as a war that should never have been fought, need never have been fought, was fought only because of the broken, lying promises of American administrations and the NATO powers over decades. What is now obvious, proven beyond contradiction, is that a Ukraine that is not in Russia's orbit, but in the orbit of the Western Empire, is an existential danger to the Russian Federation, can invade Russia at any time, as it did this week. But as Bismarck once said, that's Bismarck, possibly the last German statesman. Bismarck once said, I have known many armies to enter Russia, but I have known none who safely got out again. And that is true today as it was in the 19th century. It's truer in the 21st century. Because no nuclear-armed superpower, none, will ever allow its neighboring state to be an existential threat to it. Ask yourself, it's not rocket science. Would the United States allow Mexico to be an existential threat to the Republic? Would the United States allow China and Russia to have armies and weapons in Mexico, able at any time to invade the United States? Of course they would not. Of course, China will never allow. Iran will never allow its next door neighbor to be openly cavorting with powers dedicated to destroying Iran. And now we're headed fast towards the final reckoning. It just struck me watching the Taliban tonight. The empire is dead. The empire is in its dying days. There has never been a better time for the conquered, for the invaded, for the occupied, for the exploited to stand up together and say no more. And that is what is underway. And the pygmy political class who represent us on increasingly smaller shares of the vote. I've been saying that Keir Starmer got the votes of 19% of the British public, but the new figures make it even worse than that. Keir Starmer was elected by 18.4% of the British public. Now, the horror story that is the British electoral system has given him munchkins by the score, by the hundred, to sit around him. The rubber stamp parliament appears like the fish on the fishmonger slab, to be there, present. Their mouths are open, but nothing is coming out. The Prime Minister is doing what the deep state in Britain, to which he has always belonged and been a servant, all the decisions that he's ever made in his life, whether to prosecute or not to prosecute, Jimmy Savile or anyone else who he prosecuted or didn't prosecute, he did in the service of his deep state masters. And that's what he continues to do when he sends British sailors, Jolly Jack tars, towards their death in the Persian Gulf or in the Eastern Mediterranean. He's serving a deep state which is beholden, subservient to the big, deep state of the empire. They say 5 eyes, but there's really only 2 eyes. The US and the UK are the kernel of the Western Empire. The French, the Italians, the Spanish, the Portuguese, they're all just jewelry on the main body of the Western Empire. And they're headed for a very considerable defeat. They're going to be defeated in a way even more humiliating now in Ukraine than they were 3 years ago today in Afghanistan, because the media now is so much more developed. Every person has a camera. Every mind has the ability to find the truth, ignominious as it is, and will be concealed as such by the Western media. But there will be no hiding place from the defeat they're about to suffer in Ukraine. As there is no hiding place for the Israeli apartheid settler state, which tonight or tomorrow night will face the music for the mass murder of so many children, innocent children, mass murder, murder most foul, slaughter of the innocents in the hundreds of thousands. The Palestinian women and children and men of Gaza, and now increasingly of the West Bank, have been bleeding effortlessly, and no one has given a damn about it. But they're about to wake up to the truth that not just in Afghanistan, not just in Ukraine, the empire and its attack dog Israel is about to suffer the most serious of reverses, one which threatens to bring the whole thing to an ignominious end. Personally, I have always hated empires. It's where I came in, as a matter of fact. I am the grandson of Irish immigrants, victims of the British Empire's first colony in the Emerald Isle of Ireland, the 4 green fields, one of which remains in bondage, but which will one day also be free. I have been fighting empire all of my now long life. In a couple of days, I will be 70. I will be 70 years old in a couple of days from now. And when I look back on this long, by the grace of God, long political life, I realize that I have spent it overwhelmingly fighting against empire. And I could make no complaint if God called me at any moment. And of course, I would willingly follow him. But if God's grace will allow me just a few more years, I feel sure I'm going to see the final defeat of the Western Empire. At least I pray that I will see it. You've come to the mother of all talk shows. We have guests tonight who can illuminate all the big stories that are unfolding in front of us right now. That's why we're called the mother of all talk shows.
A new dawn has broken, has it not?
He had that Clinton thing. His eyes were round and big and smiley, and he was very charming.
He became this incredible pop idol kind of prime minister.
I think most people who have dealt with me think I'm a pretty straight sort of guy, and I am.
New Labour was backed by the most powerful media interests because they realised he was representing them.
He was caught red-handed trading policy in return for hard cash from a businessman.
America has no truer friend than Great Britain.
Both Bush as well as Tony Blair are now wanting to plunge the world into a Holocaust.
JP Morgan paid him off for the Iraq war. The man is a war criminal.
Is Tony Blair a war criminal? In my opinion, yes.
Most definitely.
The pursuit of money has become the dominant theme in your life.
All these relationships are, in most people's estimation, corrupt relationships.
No previous Labour Prime Minister has behaved in this shameful, money-grubbing way.
How do you sleep at night? You know, it's that. It's as a person.
We're running a poll, as usual. Is Ukraine's Kursk attack a masterstroke or PR stunt? You can vote for masterstroke or for PR stunt. You can vote on my Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway. You can vote on my Twitter, my X. You can vote on the YouTube community poll, and you can vote on the YouTube stream. 20,332 of you have already done so, and the poll is just being announced. So get your vote in over the next couple of hours, just short of a couple of hours, 1 hour, 40 minutes. And let's make this a big opinion poll on the Ukraine Kursk stunt or masterstroke. You decide. If you want to call the show, it's toll-free in the US and Canada, +1 844 944 3344. It is free of charge in the UK and Ireland, 0808 196 5522. And it is, the worldwide number is 44203 966 2625. Fiorella Isabel is an independent journalist, a political analyst, host of Fiorella Isabel and the Convo Couch. And she is a must-read, must-listen to anyone who wants to understand what's happening in the world. There's so much of the world that you cover that I don't know quite where to start. Let's start with Venezuela. The empire tried to find another Juan Guaido. They came up with someone who, for some bizarre reason, seemed to have a woman standing in his place, or was she really the candidate and he was the dummy? Who was the ventriloquist? Who was the dummy? Wasn't all that clear to me, but having declared, Blinken declared that somebody unknown to me was now the president of Venezuela, they've had to, in Washington parlance, walk that back. Is the empire giving up in Venezuela? Are they accepting the inevitable?
Well, I have to say that the things that are happening in Venezuela are very, very much reminiscent of how we have shifted into a new era. of going towards multipolarity. Because if you recall in 2019, when Juan Guaido was named the interim president of Venezuela, the United States had far more support. In fact, they had the support of several Latin American countries involving the Lima Group, which are several countries that came together to oppose Maduro and basically try to remove him from office. And so what we're seeing now is that a few years later, things have greatly shifted because the United States is no longer able to act as a bully in this unipolar world. Immediately, who recognized Venezuela's results? Russia, China, much of Latin America. In fact, you had other countries that had been resisting and fighting U.S. imperialism, U.S. coup attempts like Honduras quickly come and say, we support Venezuela. Nicaragua, same thing. And on top of that, what ended up happening was you had countries like Brazil come into the fold, Mexico, and back up Venezuela and say, hands off Venezuela, Venezuela's sovereignty must be respected. So now you're seeing that geopolitical shift in the entire world be reflected on the events happening in Venezuela. You're also seeing another situation that's developed for the United States, as you mentioned earlier, right? We have the conflict in Ukraine that's going not well for the US and NATO. You have a lot of weaknesses being exposed there. And then, of course, we have what's going on with Israel, the impending attack from Iran, Israel's exposure to the world as a failed Zionist entity, a failed project. You have the fact that the genocide in Gaza cannot be ignored, even though people are desperately trying to ignore it in the first world. And so you see that now reflected in the fact that the United States cannot continue overextending itself. It has yet failed again in this other coup attempt because also they've had to, as you mentioned, backtrack, moonwalk their initial recognition of Gonzalez, Edmundo Gonzalez, who, as you mentioned, he's just the puppet being mastered by Maria Corina Machado, who is the one that is behind the scenes, also a Zionist, by the way, has been manipulating this whole thing because he, like Biden, can barely move around, barely utter words. But behind him, of course, is the United States, the opposition. Maduro called it out himself. He himself said the United States is behind these attempts to overthrow Venezuela, to overthrow their legitimate government. And he also signaled the amount of money that many of these protesters that were trying to reinvigorate the guarimbas of 2017 were paid $150 a day to push this violent scenario, to make it look like Venezuela is very destabilized, to make it look like it needs help from the United States, which is, of course, this modus operandi of the intelligence. And then, of course, it didn't work. And so I think what we have seen is a reflection of the changing of the times in Venezuela. And of course, they're going to continue. You have John Bolton saying we need to reestablish the Lima Group in order to get rid of Maduro, fully flat out calling this out. But I think it's going to be very difficult for all the reasons that I just mentioned.
As a metaphor for the dying of empire, this failed coup d'etat, not the first one, not even the fifth one, in Venezuela, will do. It's a very good one. But the metaphor for me is the imbecilic President Joe Biden lying on a deck chair. He has spent 45% of his presidency on vacation. And oddly, he thinks it's a good look for the photographers to be able to see him lying on a deck chair from which he cannot get up without the assistance of his G-men. And cackling Kamala Harris, Kama Chameleon, giggling around the stages of the United States, seeking to renew the Biden-Harris mandate, but with Harris in the top position. And the shambling, shuffling, shambolic figure of Donald Trump in his new persona, lisping away with Elon Musk in a 2-hour ramble on Twitter, and I look at this picture of American political power, and I compare and contrast it with the vigor of Maduro, with the vigor of Putin, with the sagacity of the Chinese leadership. And I realize I'm looking at rising powers and looking at the declining powers they are leaving in their wake. Do you see it that way?
Yeah, I would agree with you. And when we're talking about the comparison between the United States political leadership or lack thereof, and then we look at Putin, for example, and the trust that people have on him when it comes to foreign policy, especially when it comes to pulling Russia into a new era in spite of sanctions, in spite of everything. And you have Maduro, another man that's also a leader of a country that has endured numerous sanctions and also numerous attempts at overthrowing it, at overthrowing him from power and basically hurting Venezuelan people in the process, starving people initially, and then, of course, having people have to fight the propaganda where they said, in spite of everything, we're here, we're surviving, we're doing well. And fighting all of this almost psychological warfare is what they've called it. And the Venezuelan Defense Ministry themselves have talked about this. This is a psychological war, as well as it is an attempt, obviously, using these regime change operations. But the fact that we're seeing this comparison, I think should open people's eyes more. As you mentioned, we saw Elon Musk and Donald Trump hold a conversation, and even though Donald Trump right now seems as the lesser of evils, one thing is certain, that U.S. presidents change, and I'm sure you know this, but the foreign policy remains the same. When we're looking at the next potential location for the theaters, we're looking at Iran. The United States, I disagree with some people saying otherwise, the United States does want a war with Iran. They are salivating. The Conservative Party wants it. The Democrats want it. When you look at how they are targeting Iran for everything, whether it's for what's happening in Gaza, for what's happening with Lebanon, for what's happening even in Venezuela, those ties between Iran and Venezuela, you're looking at a country that wants to use any excuse, perhaps any sort of false flag operation, perhaps something that can convince the American public to go to war with Iran. I saw that reflected in the conversation between Elon Musk and Donald Trump when they're talking about the immigration issue. Now, immigration is a huge problem in the United States. That is a fact. However, the way it was being phrased was, oh, all these people from Venezuela are coming in, and all these people, these Arabs are coming in. That is what it was said in that conversation. And some of these people, you know, they might try to do something. I see that as being formulated as an attempt to get, number one, the people in the U.S. to come against one another, maybe in some sort of riot, civil conflict, whatever that may be. Number two, in an attempt to, of course, allow the support for intervention and war with Iran. And I think that's happening both in the United States as well as in the UK and Europe, with different, of course, differences in the intricacies of each. But what we're seeing here is the focusing on the other one once again, instead of course, focusing on the failures of the government. The United States is a failed state. We have a failed infrastructure. We have a declining in a lifespan. We have a decline in the way people live. We have an inability to have a first world type of leadership and people that exist, because we have so much abundance, yet all of that abundance is being thrown away. And we are left with a population that is addicted to drugs, a population that is houseless, and none of these things are being talked about. What's being talked about is, who are we blaming? Are we blaming Iran? Now it's Iran interfering in the elections against Donald Trump, right? A few years ago, it was Russia. It is as ludicrous to think that Iran is interfering in U.S. elections as it was to think that Russia was interfering in ours.
Well, you know, Venezuela, as you very well know, has billions more barrels of oil under its land and water than Saudi Arabia does. That's what first attracted the American empire to Venezuela. Iran is oil and gas rich, now a nuclear power with its own nuclear power plants generating like billion. Russia, the biggest country in the world, is the country that has everything. It literally has everything, except arguably enough people, which is why so many of us are thinking of emigrating there. They are giving away land to people who will move there. But the biggest country in the world with the biggest collection of actual wealth, the things that we actually need, whilst our economies are sinking, failing, flailing, and our political class, miniature as it is, seems to have no idea how we are going to get out of this. And if the best idea, my dear wise lady, is either Kamala Harris or Donald Trump, then I suggest that we have already lost. How do people follow your work, Fiorella?
Well, people can find me on X or Twitter at Fiorella Isabel M. You can also find me on Telegram at Fiorella in Moscow or Rumble under Fiorella Isabel. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Is Ukraine's Kursk attack a masterstroke or a PR stunt? I forgot to say, if you're watching this on the YouTube stream, please share it with everybody that you know. Ditto, if you're watching on Twitter, on Rumble, all the, I think, 15 platforms on which this show is right now appearing, please share it with everyone that you're in touch with on that platform. And subscribe to my YouTube channel. We're trying to get to 500,000 subscribers in short order, and we need your help for that. Let me take a quick break, then it's your calls all the way to the hour. Stay tuned.
Hello, George. I heard Neil Kinnock commenting on you losing your seat, okay? I was disgusted and amazed at what he said. He was like an ignorant football supporter. He actually punched his fist in the air, saying he was delighted that you were gone, that you were a horrible person. That's the first thing he said. When he was leader of the Labour Party, he was conniving morning, noon and night to kick you out of the party. Now, this is before Tony Blair, and you were in good standing with the Labour Party. Mr. Kinnock, that chap just totally disgusted me. So what I think the British have to do, and the Irish and everybody else, is they need a new conversation and stop drinking Coca-Cola and Pepsi. And I think all those people in British civil society, including Jeremy Corbyn, Diane Abbott, Ken Livingstone, and very many more, have to have a conversation about how to wean the British and everybody else away from these Coca-Cola and Pepsi parties.
Nobody knows who Neil Kinnock is. Those who know who he is know he's the man from the Welsh Valleys that betrayed the miners. Frankly, the hatred of Neil Kinnock I wear not even as a badge of honor, a little tiny pin maybe, because pretty soon no one will have heard of him at all. But the wider subject that you raise is the important one. I don't know, Jeremy says he doesn't want to form a party. That's fine by me. I've got my own party. I'll be staying in it anyway. But what I would like him to do is to announce a new popular front, like the one that has just, I can tell you officially, won the French parliamentary elections.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Let's go to Germany with the first call. Malik is in Germany on Kursk. We must hear that. Malik, welcome. What would you like to say?
Good evening, Mr. Galloway. This is always a pleasure to listen to you and now to talk with you. And I must say I have something in common with you. I will also be 70 in few days, and I have the same wish as you, the end of this colonial empire and peace for the world. I was going to ask you...
I mean, let's hope it works.
Well, this is what we're all sitting on the edge of our seats to see what happens. I was going to ask you about if the NATO attack under the flag of Ukraine in Kursk, if this is a trap from the Russia, but it seems everybody seems to have voted for that it is a plan from the Russia to get the NATO come in there so they can wipe them out. So I will ask a second question, and that is, why is Iran taking such a long time to reply? Because last time I heard that when they replied to the attack in Syria, they had to ask permission from the USA. What is your views on that? Thank you.
Well, as the Iranian leadership said this week, they don't have to ask permission from anyone to reply to the Israeli attack on them in the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. That is their internationally enshrined legal right. No one even pretends that Iran does not have the legal right to respond. And don't speak too soon, Malik. The engines may be revving this evening, but the engines will rev either this evening or the next or sometime very soon. Of that I am sure. As to whether Russia, like Ali in the corner when he rope-a-doped George Foreman, whether this was deliberate is a matter of opinion. I personally think not. I think it's a consequence of Russia's failure to wage total war on Ukraine. The continuation of the phrase special military operation has long meant that the gloves were kept on and the soft shoes were worn into battle. But just as you can't be a little bit pregnant, you can't be a little bit at war with the entire firepower, military-industrial complex, political and diplomatic matrix of the Western Empire's NATO military alliance. You can't be a little bit at war with them. And so what I think is that the argument that has been going on in Moscow has now been won by the people who, let's put it this way, who have maximalist intentions towards Ukraine. No one can any longer pretend that the existence of a Ukraine which is not a friend of Russia can be tolerated any more than a Mexico which was in the hands of hostile powers, hostile to the United States, would not be permitted. Not for 5 minutes would it be permitted. As I said at the beginning, this is not rocket science. I'm asking every American to put themselves in Russia's shoes in that regard. And if they do, they will have no doubt at all as to why Russia felt that they had to act in the way that they acted, and why, ask themselves why this has been allowed to drag on for so long. And the riposte of President Putin that there will be no more negotiations with Kiev is, I think, far more serious than most Western media have yet alighted on. Malik, I hope that I didn't offend my friends in Germany.
No.
With what I said earlier. Yeah, go on, come back.
But Yeah, what I want to say is that at the moment it's very hot here, and I have been suffering from these high temperatures since 23rd of October last year, and I've been helplessly watching all these things because every German city hall there are Israeli flags are hanging there, and the Germans appear to have become more Zionist than Israeli themselves. I just can't understand that. It's very frustrating.
Well, not only that, but the new law, which I foretold and has now come to pass, requires any new citizen of Germany to sign a pledge of allegiance, not to Germany, but to Israel. And all these town halls to which you refer are hanging two flags, neither of them German. They're flying the flags of Ukraine and Israel outside every town hall in Germany. The German government and its political class has gone quite mad. And although there are many, many German citizens who don't like it, the militarization of repression that is underway in Germany, unremarked by all Western commentators, unremarked by the European Union, which is supposed to stand for freedom of speech, assembly, and all the other lipsticks that the Western Empire has worn so proudly over the last century and more, have all been tossed in the bin. Malik, thank you for that. Now, remember, you can download the MOATS podcast from tomorrow morning to get the bite-sized version of this show. We're in the top 10 in Lebanon and in the top 10 in Hong Kong this week. And we're in the top 5 in Zimbabwe. We're into the top 100 in France for this first time. You can download the MOATS podcast by scanning that QR code that you see at the bottom of your screen right now. Let's go to London for the next call, where Josh wants to talk about Kursk. Josh, welcome. What's on your mind?
Yeah, well, I think it's just the elephant in the room, really, that like a country that is being invaded by another, as per the official narrative, prioritizes invading that country before it's recaptured, much of its own land. Sounds to me like they've got their priorities a bit, mixed up, a little bit out of order. But I mean, not that they were ever in order to begin with, but I certainly think that while this may boost Zelensky's popularity in the very short term, I think plenty of Ukrainians are going to wake up to the fact that he's essentially by prioritizing capturing Russian territory over recapturing his territory supposedly sovereign to his own country, is essentially abandoning the people in his allegedly occupied lands, i.e. Donetsk, Donbass, etc.
And the Donbass, Donetsk people want nothing to do with Zelensky, want nothing to do with Kiev. In truth, they never have, but they were prepared to accept that Russia did not want them, wanted the agreed borders, but insisted on the protection of Russian nationals, Russian-speaking and Russian culturally aligned people. They insisted on human rights for them, on equal civil rights for them. But the coup in 2014 made that impossible. And if you think about it, that's exactly what we were predicting when we opposed that coup when it was taking place. Now, Lindsey Graham, the repulsive bottom-dwelling slug that poses as a US senator, is again in Ukraine right now and is declaring that the invasion of Russia at Kursk is not only perfectly legitimate, but something of which he's extremely proud. Well, the Ukrainian people are paying and will pay a very high price for this hubris. So if it's a PR stunt, as is posed in our poll, it's going to turn out to be the biggest boomerang in history. Thanks, Josh. Bren 10 says BlackRock owns more of pre-2022 Ukraine than the Russians have taken. Who are the real invaders? Well, BlackRock sure won't own it for long. Retired rebel said, I just watched Professor Marandi with the most hostile, imbecilic, disruptive host presenter from Wire in India on YouTube. His name was Karpan or such. It was excruciatingly painful to watch and listen. I promise you, the interview with Professor Marandi coming up in the second hour of MOATS this evening will be much better than that. David is in Swindon. Go ahead, David.
Thank you very much. Yeah. The first thing, just going back to your monologue, I'd just like to add to the imperial invasions, because, I mean, people, it seems to be the age. I'm just a few years older than you, George. So let's not forget Vietnam. America getting out of Vietnam, Saigon, they left in disgrace. Another classic.
Indeed.
Then we have. They haven't
won a war. Haven't won a war since 1945.
Let me move
and
along.
We only won that because of the Red Army.
Yeah. Let's move along a bit, because then we've got North and South Korea. That was another escapade in America that failed. So we have to put that North and South. But going back to when I was, I think I was 10 in my little shorts at school, we had the invasion of Cuba, but an American-led invasion of Cuba, which again failed, Bay of Pigs. And a few years later, we had, going back to what your analogy of Mexico having nuclear, just look what happened when America thought Cuba was going to have nuclear weapons on. They went ballistic. Well, they went mad, didn't they? They blockaded Cuba.
Yeah, they almost went ballistic, yeah.
Yeah, no,
the whole world almost perished over it.
Yeah, I remember it. But that's going back, that's the thing. But going back to the next point on Russia, I also agree. I think they should have gone in harder. I think that I'm not an armchair colonel, but why haven't they even started to take Odessa to seal off the Black Sea? You know, get that line along the bottom.
I think they will.
Yeah.
No, I think they will, and they'll take Transnistria too. Transnistria will be returning to the Russian motherland. I just watched a great documentary from Transnistria by a man on YouTube called Bald and Bankrupt. I don't know if you have heard of him. He has 4.5 million followers, subscribers on YouTube. And he makes these little docs from the former Soviet Union, and he did one that I watched today in Transnistria. It's absolutely fascinating. David, great call. Thanks for it. Bobby is in London on Russian history. Go ahead, Bobby.
Good evening, Mr. Galloway. I always love to watch the Mother of All Talk show on Wednesday and Sunday. Firstly, I wanted to be the Prime Minister in 2028. This is very important. And I can assure you, Mr. Galloway, you will win. The British people want you to become the Prime Minister of Britain. That's the first point.
I think that ship has sailed. But go ahead. I have many children. Maybe one of them. Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah. No, you're still a young man. You're still a young man. I can see it. Age is a number. And you will become a great Prime Minister.
Too young. I'm too young for American politics. Too old for British politics. Go on.
Yeah. The second point, Mr. Galloway, I wanted to make, when Hitler threw the Jewish people from Germany, they went all along to every country in the world, and they said, we cannot give you a shelter, except Britain, because Palestine was under the British, and they gave them the land, and they said, this is our land, and God gave it to us. So why you went to Africa? Why you went to the Middle East? Why, and so on. And the third point, Mr. Galloway, is about Russia-Ukraine. Let me make it very clear. I know Ukraine very well, better this guy Volodymyr Zelensky, who is actually a Polish descent. I want the British people in the world. He's not Ukrainian. He's a Polish descent, and I know Ukraine very, very well. In 1953, Stalin, when took over the Soviet Union, and he was very ill, and he was about dying. He said, he said, when I die, I want the leadership to go to a guy called Lavrenti Beria. I hope you know him. He's actually a Georgian.
I do.
And he said very clear, everything is recorded. The people who will destroy the Soviet Union, they will be Slavic people, Slavic Russian, Slavic Ukrainian, Slavic Belarusian, and so on. And look what happened. They destroyed it deliberately. And when Mikhail Gorbachev came, Reagan, he was with Thatcher, and he said, go and destroy that wall. And that's it, it's finished. You know, Russia.
Yeah, Gorbachev destroyed the Soviet Union, and not because of any Slavic or Ukrainian or any other national ethnicity or origin, but because he was a slave to empire. Bobby in London with a tour of Russian history brings us close to the end of the first hour. Let me read some messages. Johnny Yuma says, behind this Kursk episode, we're seeing utter disregard for Ukraine's lives. However, I'm not sure what percentage of the attackers are NATO regulars. Anybody knows what percent of attackers are actually, does anybody know how many are NATO regulars? They caught hundreds of French, Polish, and UK soldiers. Yeah, at least 800 foreign soldiers have been captured or killed to date. Blue Cheesy says the PR stunt that is going to really hurt when the Russians close the gap behind, leaving all attacking force screwed. And Neil Lowe says, seems to me Netanyahu has pushed Iran to its limits, and Zelensky has done the same with Putin. I'd wager they're both going to get a lesson they'll not soon forget. And Mohammed Osman Ali Mahmoud says, how close are we to the ultimate global warming? 5 minutes to midnight. It's a lot closer than 5 minutes to midnight. We can squeeze one call in before the break. It's Deborah in Blackpool on Kursk. Deborah, what's on your mind?
Hi, George. I'm just absolutely fuming at the lies that the British public have been told over what's went on in Ukraine, and they forget to mention the coup in Maidan, and which led to Zelensky getting put in, and the coup was orchestrated by America.
Of course it was, and the European Union.
Yeah, exactly, George. You know, and for us to be funding Ukraine against Russia, you know, and according to NATO, they were never going to go eastwards, and that's exactly what they've continued to do, and they're right on
thousands
Russia's
of kilometers.
border.
Yeah, not they promised. They promised not 1 inch. They promised not 1 inch. They moved thousands of kilometers. And now Zelensky has just shown how easily Russian territory itself can be penetrated by a NATO army. And so the decision is surely now there will never be any scintilla of NATO influence anywhere in Ukraine. Anywhere. That's got to be the Russian national decision. I'm pretty sure it's already made, Deborah. Last word to you.
Well, I hope so. And also what's going on in Israel, and I think Keir Starmer, the cheek of him to phone the Iranian president and ask them to calm down and don't attack Israel? Are they having a laugh? Is he really in charge of this country? He's an absolute
Unfortunately,
idiot.
yes. Although I'll tell you what, Deborah, I can imagine the consternation in the government corridors in Tehran. Somebody called Keir Starmer is on the line. Anybody know who he is? Let me take a quick break, but right after this break, right after it, is the one and only Professor Seyed Mohammad Marandi, the Chair of American Studies at the University of Tehran, and a man who has emerged as the clearest voice in the English language about what's happening, not just in and around Iran, but around the world. Stay tuned. I'll be right back with Professor Marandi. Let's hear from Mehdi. Go ahead, sir.
Hello, George. Thank you very much for taking my call. This is such an honor because one thing I want to tell you is in 2003, I thought that you, I'll say it, I thought you were a prattling liberal idiot. 20 years later, I'm here honored to speak to you to say live on air, I'm sorry, I should have listened to you back then. You're bringing the truth to what's going on out there. And one of the things is U.S. policy, whatever it is now, is our government. The problem is that it's run by people with absolutely no honor. They have no shame in what they will do to accomplish what they want. And I really think part of what's going on, that's driving what's going on in Ukraine, is that it's the possibility of all the corruption that it will uncover that has happened there with the influence of our country and NATO since 2014.
Yeah, you spoke extremely powerfully and very graciously, and I'm grateful for it. But you put your finger on, I think, something that's been in the back of my mind for a while. I grew up in a time, indeed I sat in Parliament for almost 30 years, during a time when there were certain standards. There were double standards, of course, and there was a great deal of hypocrisy, but the ruling elite had standards that they tried to keep up. Nowadays, that facade has been torn asunder. Now they're not even pretending to be honorable gentlemen and ladies. Now they're no longer pretending that their institutions, their great departments and ministries are in anything to do with contemporary politics other than an arm of the ruling party. My last word, Mehdi. I ain't no liberal, bruv. I wasn't back in 2003, and I ain't any more liberal today.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Get voting in this poll, although the balance is overwhelming. That it is a PR stunt, the Kursk affair. I really would like the number of respondents to be even higher than it is. 23,165 of you have voted. So vote on my Telegram channel, on my X, on my YouTube stream, and on the YouTube community poll. C. Pillay says, I also found Marandi's interview by the host of The Wire, another Western Uncle Tom sellout, nauseating. Thanks, your show is more balanced, truthful, and not biased nor prejudiced. Well, I'm sure Professor Seyed Mohammad Marandi agrees with that. Although he's a gracious and diplomatic man, he probably won't want to refer to his nightmare with the Wire. But welcome back, Professor. You are always welcome here, and our audience values your analysis very gratefully. Kindly, if you will, say how you see the current situation now with regard to Iran's legal, entirely legal, right to retaliate against the attack upon it by the apartheid state in Tel Aviv?
Thank you, George. I think it's inevitable. There really is nothing else that the Iranians can do. If the Iranians don't retaliate, the Israeli regime will only become more aggressive. It is a regime that only understands force, just like we saw in 2006.
We'll come back to you, Professor, because your line has frozen. Cyrus Shirazi says, Comrade Galloway, could you ask Professor Marandi what's the latest on Iran-Biden nuclear deal, please? Pretty please. Of course I will, as soon as we get him back. Now, the poll shows that 94% of those voting on Telegram, 83% of those voting on Twitter, 90% of those voting in the community poll, and 90% of those voting in the stream think that the Ukraine Kursk affair is a PR stunt. And in a way, that balance is not surprising, but you still have time to add your vote to the mix. So please get doing that between now and about a quarter to the hour, which will be the close of the poll. We've got Professor Marandi back. Now, Professor, you were just saying that it was inevitable because if it didn't happen, Israel's aggression would continue unbounded, with no fear of retaliation. Please develop that point, if you will.
Absolutely. When in April, the Israeli regime bombed the Iranian consulate in Syria, the Iranians took the case to the UN Security Council. And the Americans, the British, the French, the Germans, they all supported the Israelis. They refused to have it condemned. So effectively, they endorsed the attack on Iran's embassy. Under such circumstances, what option does Iran have except to create its own deterrent? So the Iranians struck the regime. And we already know the story. The Iranians forced the Israelis and the Americans to spend roughly $4 billion to down a lot of cheap drones. Iran gained a lot of intelligence, and Iran
Yes, this is, again, unfortunately, we've lost Professor Marandi just when we needed him most. But what I think is now clear is that the attack on the Iranian embassy in Syria was so egregious, so murderous. 7 people were murdered in it, along with the target. It was such a breach of the Vienna Convention, which protects diplomatic premises from attacks such as those. It was such a breach of Syria's national sovereignty to be attacked by a foreign power in this way that it should have been condemned by the diplomats of all countries. What now is the justification for not having done so? By the British, by the French, by the United States. If they had done so, they would have had a leg to stand on in asking Iran not to escalate the situation. Professor Marandi, I was just making the point of how foolish now it looks of the Security Council not to have condemned the breach of the Vienna Convention, Treaty of Vienna, which protects diplomatic premises. How foolish it was not to condemn Israel's egregious breach of international law by the killing of many people that took place in the Iranian embassy. They would have had, at the very least, a better leg to stand on in trying to influence how Iran now responds to the Hania case. As it happens, they refuse to condemn it and now have no leg to stand on.
Yes, and recently the Americans and the British and the French, as well as the Italians, and I think the Germans, they signed a joint statement speaking of Iranian aggression. So the Israeli regime assassinated a guest, Martyr Haniyeh, in Tehran, a close friend of Iran, violating Iranian sovereignty and violating international law and insulting the honor of Iran because he was our guest. And then the Americans and the Europeans have the audacity to speak of Iranian aggression. And they express their deep concern about Iran's potential aggression against the Israeli regime. So basically what the Americans and the Europeans are saying is that the only way forward is for the Iranians to strike back. When the Americans, whether it's at the Security Council, and the Europeans at the Security Council, refuse to condemn the regime and effectively endorse it, when they issue statements instead of condemning the Israelis for assassinations and murder, whether in Tehran or in Beirut, and instead they support the regime, what option do they leave for countries like Iran? So Iran has no option but to strike the regime, and it will do so. And the same is true with Hezbollah. They have no option because this is a brutal regime that's allowed to do anything it wants. And we see what they're doing in Gaza. We see how the Americans are giving $20 more billion of weapons so that they can continue the slaughter. So anyone who says that the Iranians should stand down or that the Iranians should seek a diplomatic solution is simply being naive. And what they will ultimately do is they're going to encourage, if Iran was to do such a thing, and it won't, is that it will encourage the regime to carry out a more audacious attack against Iran in future, and ultimately Iran will have to respond then. So it's best for Iran to strike now to create deterrence so that it won't happen again.
So most of our audience are pondering why the delay. Ali Mohammad says, for example, is the delay due to pilgrims going in their hundreds of thousands walking to Karbala, to Iraq? Others think it may be connected to the so-called ceasefire talks on the 15th, tomorrow. Others think there must be frantic negotiation going on behind the scenes. Others think there may be some division in Iran about the quantity, quality, nature of the Iranian response. There are many, many theories. And of course, the longer we wait, the more theories will multiply. What's your own, as an academic, what's your own analysis of why there has been this delay and whether there will be much more delay?
Well, except for the claim of divisions in Iran, which is nonsense, and I should advise your viewers that whenever Reuters says that they've spoken to unnamed Iranian sources, that means they've been speaking to themselves. And the same is true with all the other Western media, mainstream legacy media outlets. Whenever they say, but this is something that Reuters does more than most, whenever they say an unnamed Iranian source, it's just fake news. The other issues that you raise, I cannot reject any of them. I'm sure there are a host of different issues at play which will help decide the timing of the strike and the nature of the strike. But what I can say is that part of it is psychological warfare. The Iranians see that the Israelis are very worried. They see that it's affected their economy, their airports, and their lives. And I think that is a part of it. Last time round, the Iranians did the same thing. This time round, it's taken a bit longer. I also think there are probably calculations because the Americans and the Europeans and some regional countries have mobilized to help the Israeli regime, and which I think is a very interesting point that we should always remember, that this regime is completely dependent on the West for its security. The West and some regional countries will mobilize to protect it after it carries out aggression, but they won't do anything to protect the Gazans. Instead, they'll give the Israelis more ammunition, more weapons, more funding, and more political cover. But ultimately, the Iranians are going to strike. I have no doubt about that. And the strike will be substantial. And I personally think it will be more substantial than what we saw in April.
Most people think that, and most people think that it will be of a longer duration also, and maybe even will be hybrid in character. Last time it was entirely aerial, but this time, as there are more parties involved, as you said, the Lebanese Resistance Organization itself suffered an equally dastardly political murder of its second in command in Beirut. So the possibility of movement across borders on land into the Galilee, the retaking of the Golan Heights, the relatively new player of the great people of Yemen, and their capability, the capabilities of the Iraqi resistance forces. This could be not only larger, but also of a different type, of a different character. What's your thoughts on that?
I think the more the war escalates, the worse it is for the Israeli regime, because Hezbollah has enormous potential that it's not using. And the same is true with Ansarullah. And of course, Iran is stronger than all of them combined. The U.S. Navy has been defeated by the Houthis, as they call them, or the Yemeni armed forces in Ansarullah in Yemen, in the Red Sea. So imagine the power that Iran has. But the issue is that Netanyahu needs to survive politically. So he wants to continue the war, and he wants to expand the war. Now, the Americans and the Europeans talk about escalation, possible, as you've been pointing out, the possible escalation of Hezbollah or the possible escalation of Iran. But this is not escalation. This is a response to escalation. The Israelis bombed Beirut. They bombed a civilian apartment block, killing a senior military commander, but murdering innocent civilians and wounding tens of others. So Hezbollah has to respond. Otherwise, the Israelis will do it again and again. The only way to stop the Israeli regime is through force, because Western countries do not want to yank on Netanyahu back, or they don't want to pull him back from escalating. So when the Americans are unwilling to pull him back, when the Europeans are unwilling to do anything about it, then Hezbollah and Iran, they have to punish them, and so does Ansarullah. But the problem is that if when Iran strikes, and let's say the Israeli regime escalates again, then what? If they don't yank on his leash, the Americans and the Europeans, then we could have a regional war. And if that happens, and the Americans get involved ultimately, then Iran will have to strike American bases in the Persian Gulf. And not only will they have to destroy American bases in the Persian Gulf, which are very easily accessible to Iran, they will also have to destroy those city-states in the Persian Gulf that are hosting those bases, because they will be a part of the problem. They'll be seen as a part of the aggression. So if Iran destroys their oil and gas installations, which they will have to do, and if the American bases and embassy is overrun in Iraq, what will happen to the global economy? You will have, when no more oil and gas leaves this region, then what the global economy will collapse. It'll be far worse than 1929 and the 1930s and during the Great Depression. So the Americans and the Europeans have to ultimately take a decision. It is Netanyahu that's escalating. It's not Iran or Hezbollah or Ansarullah or anyone else. These are the entities that are responding to prevent further escalation, because they know that if they don't respond, the Israelis will take it further and further and further.
We'll leave it there, because that was such a powerful answer. It would be impossible to top it. Professor Marandi, thank you, as always, for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. So there you have it. A man who knows much of what is going on in the region, not all. He's not an Iranian official. He's not speaking for the Iranian government. But if that didn't make your blood run cold about the possible consequences of the step after the next step, then I don't know that you're still sentient at all. Is Ukraine's Kursk attack a masterstroke or a PR stunt? 24,234 people have voted. And they've voted overwhelmingly that it's a PR stunt. But we'll see just how successful a PR stunt it turns out to be. Quick break, and then it's your calls right up until my good wife, Gayatri, tells me what's rattling on social media. Stay tuned. Let me say that you can listen to the audio-only version of MOATS on our MOATS podcast, and the numbers on that are going through the roof. Just search MOATS with George Galloway on Apple, Spotify, Google, or whichever platform you listen to your podcasts on. In recent weeks, it's been the #1 political podcast in Benin, Jordan, the Gambia, Qatar, Jamaica, Ghana, Iceland, Malaysia, Singapore, Sweden, and the Philippines. #1 political podcast in all those countries. Truly, truly phenomenal. Do you know that BBC News has lost 40% of its audience in the last 2 years? It's official. And of course, that is the sensible thing to do. But to get people to tune in and change course and listen to a radically different point of view is even more difficult. But it's happening. And the numbers that we are racking up are now in their millions.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now, I told you this is the Global University of the Airwaves, so let me call on Stig in Finland on Kursk. Go ahead, Stig, what's on your mind?
Well, there is this saying that history does not repeat itself, it only rhymes. But occasionally I do think that history repeats itself. I mean, we had in the summer of 1943, the Nazi German invasion army had suffered a catastrophic defeat in Stalingrad 5 months earlier. And then in the midst of the summer of 1943, they chose to start the big battle of Kursk, and they were catastrophically defeated. And now we have this Nazi Banderite regime in Kiev that is having this Holocaust perpetrator Stepan Bandera as their hero #1. They have suffered one defeat after another during this year, and now in the summer of 2024, exactly 81 years later, they start their own Battle of Kursk in order to boost morale and to try to get things turned around. But exactly as it went very bad for Hitler's Germany, I'm certain that it will end very bad for the Nazi Banderite regime in Kiev, this also. So it is a PR stunt that will go very wrong.
What do you think were the Western government's true attitudes to it? First of all, they tried to claim that they knew nothing of it, that it was all little Zelensky, the TV comedian, who thought it up all by himself. They described it in their media as a gamble and so on. But it's difficult to believe that Zelensky did such a momentous thing as declaring Kursk 2.0. It's difficult to believe that he did not consult, for example, the Germans, whose tanks are there now on Russian soil again?
Well, I think it's very clear that not only has the Western leaders, and especially the Americans, of course, who are the central player, not only have they okayed this operation, but I do think that they have been very heavily involved in planning and carrying it out also. So I do think that this is something that has been. I don't know whose the original idea was, but at least if it was originally an idea cooked up in Kiev, but it has at least been very, very clearly backed up, and the Western powers have been involved in planning and carrying this out. That's pretty obvious, but
yeah, that's my view also. And you know, I was virtually alone in the British Parliament, taking the view that a reunited Germany was a very bad idea. That of all the betrayals by Gorbachev, the acceptance of the end of the division of Germany was geostrategically the most significant. I warned journalists like Andrew Neil and other politicians in Britain that no good could come of a reunified, resurgent, and, as I predicted, re-Nazified German regime. Not in the same stripes, but the same mentality. And as it happened, after a speech I gave to that effect, when Helmut Kohl was in power in Germany, and when I railed against the end of the Second World War settlement to keep Germany divided and demilitarized, I heard these high heels come after me in the House of Commons, and I could almost hear the swing of the handbag. And Margaret Thatcher, no less, closed on my left ear and said, I'll never forget it, I rather agreed with that, and swept on. My point of view never used to be a lonely one. It never used to be one only held on my side of politics. It was widely held in France. After all, Germany invaded and occupied France 3 times in 70 years. 3 times. In 1870, in 1914, and in 1940. So it now is a cranky point of view, I feel. But I said, and I stand by it, that we will live long to regret allowing Germany to become a reunified and remilitarized, increasingly militarized, and increasingly adventurous power in Europe again. We will live to regret it. I may not see it, but many of you watching will see it, that Germany should never have been allowed to reassemble the kind of military force that brought the world to total war, total Krieg throughout the world in the lifetime of some people still watching this show tonight. I'm not talking about ancient history. I'm talking about the history that your grandparents, if not your parents, if not you yourself, lived through. Germany was divided for a reason. Germany was occupied for a reason. It was forced to adopt an anti-military, anti-militarist constitution for a reason. And all of that, because of hatred of Russia, nothing else, has been cast aside. And Germany, whilst now an economic basket case, is in direct proportion, inverse proportion, The more of a basket case it becomes, the more foreign adventures it's ready to embark upon, including this reinvasion of Kursk. And it's all being done by a pink, oh so very pink, and green, not at all green, coalition government in Berlin. Imagine. Little soldier Schultz and bonkers bareback are leading the world to disaster. Thanks, Stig, for that call. Controlled Demolition says, Kursk was a failed terrorist attack against the Kursk nuclear power plant. The Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant was attacked again immediately afterwards by the Ukrainian terrorists. Jack Klugman, great name, says, weird how our IDF UK SAS trained Azov Nazis are murdering children in Kursk. It's almost like we are the terrorists. Are we the baddies? As that comedian famously asked. Russell Culverson says American, French and British troops in Kursk, I believe they were there to blow up the nuclear power plant and cause chaos in Russia. George is in Cyprus on Gaza and Cyprus. Go ahead, George.
Good evening, George. Thanks very much. Good to talk to you again. You recall sometime in July there was a speech by Hassan Nasrallah, the Secretary General of Hezbollah, who threatened directly our island here with retribution in the event that any of our airports or harbours will be used to attack them or the actual resistance generally. Now that statement took everybody here by dismay, due to the fact that we have very cordial relations with Lebanon, and the majority of the people, and I stress the people, not necessarily the administration of Cyprus, the government of President Nikos Christodoulides, about which I will say a little more later. We are generally pro-Palestinian. So it was inconceivable that we would consciously allow our land to be used to launch attacks. However, if you scratch below the surface and look at what's happening, in amongst the fog of war, there is the basis in what he's saying. The administration of Cyprus, the government of Mr. Christodoulides and previous administrations have had arrangements with Israel, the state of Israel, in trade and so on, and which is totally unacceptable at a time where states are now BDSing Israel left, right, and center, and we're continuing to trade with them. Okay, there are certain economic considerations there, but let's go beyond that. We're not hosting armies from the U.S. The warships docked in the port here in Limassol, supposedly here to evacuate third-party nationals from Lebanon when the balloon goes up there. There's 4,000 German Marines also somewhere on the island, supposedly also here for the same purpose. The stories which I'm not able to verify, but supposedly there was a detachment of IDF here doing maneuvers, doing training in a part of the island, in the highlands, where the topography and fauna are very similar to the southern borders of Lebanon. That's a big no-no in view of the ICJ ruling and the edicts there. So one is left wondering, are we useful idiots, or are we complicit in genocide?
Well, you are, and you didn't even get to the British base in Akrotiri, which is flying American and British warplanes, surveillance planes, military transport planes back and forward to Israel from Cyprus. Now, you may say it's a British base, sovereign territory and so on. What kind of country allows other countries to have sovereign military bases on their territory in which they are participating in a war which your people don't want to participate in? It's about time the people of Cyprus took back control over their own land and stop these military forces of countries that don't give a damn about Cyprus using and abusing their facilities for training and for military logistics. I'm sure that you agree with me on all of that, although maybe you didn't mention Akrotiri for a reason. George, thanks, always welcome as a caller. Ola is in Poland on Kursk. Ola, what would you like to say?
Yes, George, congratulations in advance for getting to the 7th floor. Yeah, on Kursk, I see Kursk as a master stroke of Hollywood-motivated PR stunt that is not ending well for the Ukrainian. I tell people that Kursk is like going on combat tourism, and it's easy to go in, but if you read history, you will know it's difficult
it's
to
not
get
easy
out.
To get out.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Then
in one piece. Exactly.
The other thing I would like to talk about is I still don't understand why people don't get it that a bloody nose is an important tool in the toolbox of dealing with bullies. I think there is nothing to, without giving this Israeli Zionist regime and the American government the bloody nose they require. They will continue to bully people around the world. This is just my take. And lastly, I would like to advise people that don't pick a fight with your next door neighbor at the behest of your distant friend. Ask Ukrainians, they will tell you it's never a good idea. You don't fight your friends.
That's,
your neighbors.
Yeah, it's brilliantly summed up. Don't pick a fight with your next door neighbor at the behest of your distant friend, who isn't even a friend, however distant, who regards you with undisguised contempt. Ola, brilliant call from Poland. Ramplens01 says there's a polio crisis now in Gaza, and it's a consequence of the bombs, dust, heavy metals poisoning. And Naveen says Germany acts as if it still owns Namibia, where it committed a bloody genocide. Indeed so, and another reason why Germany should never have been allowed to arise from the ashes of World War II in any form that would have allowed it to return to its revanchist, fascist, colonial past. Now, my other show, Have It Out with Galloway, is beginning to really take off. It is becoming a rumbustious affair. Take a look at this. If you want to join me on Have It Out with Galloway, you can be the audience member on that video wall so that I can see as well as hear you. Come and have it out with Galloway. Come and have a go if you think you're hard enough. www.haveitoutwithgalloway.com.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
You'd be a fool not to watch Have It Out with Galloway, but actually be missing out if you're one of my regular callers. you'd be missing out in not joining me, because the unique thing about Have It Out with Galloway is that you don't just call the show, you appear on it in vision on a video screen. It's innovative, something I'm trialing for later possible use on MOATS itself. It's technologically quite difficult, but it's working well. So check it out, Have It Out with Galloway. One of our regular callers from the beginning, such that she became the legend that is Norma in Bristol, and whose appearances are much and always anticipated. Norma, welcome back to the show.
Hello, George. Bear with me, because I've just rushed back, because I didn't think you were going to ring me for a minute. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to share with you a conversation I had with my sister, who lives in Liverpool, and she's just come out of hospital. So we come on to the subject of Israel. But during the discussion, she said there are two sides to this with the Palestinians, and they are represented in the Knesset, you know, and it's not an apartheid state. And she agreed. There was disproportionate amount of killings. That was bad. But when I said to her, we should stop selling weapons to Israel, she replied, if we did stop, Nora, she said, Israel would just be annihilated. And I thought, oh, I'm not going to continue much further, because she wasn't a well woman, and nor am I. But I was a bit shocked, because she's intelligent, you know? That's what I wanted to share with you.
Well, it's an interesting reflection of how propagandized we have been. Israel is behaving like Nazi Germany. Nobody would claim that we have to arm Nazi Germany, or otherwise it would be annihilated. Yeah. Nobody would say we have to arm apartheid South Africa, otherwise it would be annihilated. If you don't want to be annihilated, stop occupying other people's land. Stop grabbing other people's territory. Stop making endless war. Stop assassinating people all over the region and indeed all over the world. But no country, no state, no political system has a right to exist, Norma. The Soviet Union had no right to exist, and now no longer exists. Apartheid South Africa had no right to exist, and now no longer exists. Czechoslovakia had no right to exist, and now doesn't exist. The United Kingdom has no right to resist. Ireland will soon be off, so might Scotland one day, and the United Kingdom will no longer exist. States exist until they don't exist. And in the case of Israel, should never have existed. There was no reason for the establishment of a state on top of someone else's land, houses, and dead bodies. Norma, thanks for that brilliant call. Mega John 1, F1, says the Kursk defense in 43 was due to Rokossovsky's brilliance. Indeed it was. El Dragon says, I'm not sure why Cuba allowed Guantanamo Bay to be used as an American base. Well, the Americans seized it when Cuba was not the same Cuba that we have today. They forced Cuba to accept a 100-year lease on it, for which they paid a check every year to the former dictatorship in Cuba. The government of Cuba every year returns the check that the Americans send for the lease of Guantanamo. But it's nothing to do with today's Cuba, and today's Cuba is not yet able to get rid of it. Jalal is in Manchester on Ukraine. Jalal, welcome. What's on your mind?
Hi, George. A long time. Firstly, how about Guaido as the next Prime Minister of Israel? Secondly, why don't we ask
maybe
for a
he's
referendum
looking for
on
a gig.
continuous wars?
We have a policy of demanding a referendum on Britain's membership of NATO. We think that if we had referenda on all these military affairs, the result would be very different to what the government and the mass media imagine. If you had to get people's agreement to spending billions, hundreds of billions on military spending, on wars and weapons, including nuclear weapons, you wouldn't receive it. So, I think referenda are a great thing. I'm quite good at referendums. Last word to you, Jalal.
At the end of the day, George, it's taxpayers' money. Taxpayers' money for taxpayers, not for Tom, Dick or Harry or this, that and the other. And I think it's about time that we stood up for all this malarkey that's going on.
I'm doing my best. You should join me, Jalal, in Manchester. Thanks very much. I'm only hurrying you on because my good wife Gayatri joins us from a mystery location. Well, a mystery to you in any case. What's rattling, Gayatri?
I wanted to start the social media with Palestine. Lance Ford says, George, I don't know how you keep it together. I'm a 54-year-old man, and I cried when you interviewed the eye surgeon from Toronto who had to amputate children's eyes. He's talking about Dr. Yasser Khan, which was a very impactful interview indeed. And yes, we don't know. We don't know how we keep it together. It's very hard. It's very hard. I've got a very telling email from Ted Sawyer. He says, George, with compliments and thanks for all, but your English language usage is slipping. You recently spoke of the devastating attack on Gazan people as such that they were literally decimated. But George, you know that the meaning of decimate means to reduce of one person in 10. Decimate does not mean devastate, annihilate, exterminate, or chop and dice. Loyally yours. We have been haunted by the terrible views, the terrible footage, particularly from that school that was attacked by Israel in Gaza City, that left no full bodies to be recovered. All they could do is gather the body pieces, put them together in bags, and allocate 70 kg for an adult person and 30 kg for a child. How horrific a stage have we arrived at?
Indeed. What can I say? Even my vocabulary does not stretch to a full description of the scenes that we have now been watching every single day for 11 months. And one can only assume that the newspaper journalists, the television broadcasters, and the politicians, one can only assume that they don't watch that footage. For if they did, it would surely be impossible for them to continue to defend what Netanyahu is doing. So I assume that they merely avert their eyes, but we cannot avert our eyes. And it's particularly...
We cannot. We see our children.
Well, that's what I was about to say. It's particularly difficult when the children that are being torn to pieces look like our children and are the age of our children and are the age of many people's children and grandchildren who are watching this show. How can you be unmoved by a decapitated child of the same age as your child or your grandchild? How can you be unmoved by that? Only if you have signed up to the subhumanization of Palestinians, of Arabs, of the other. Only if you regard them as less than you, less than your children, can you possibly be unmoved by it? Any more, Gayatri?
Shall I go to the poll? Is Ukraine's Kursk attack a masterstroke or PR stunt? Jonathan Wood says it's a PR stunt / political circus coupled with a desperate last gamble designed to create chaos. And chaos is indeed what we have. John C. says there's an old saying, come into the parlor, said the spider to the fly. I have said it before, Napoleon and Hitler could not defeat the Russians. Ukrainians have got no chance. This one is from Ben. He's asking you, George, did you see Liz Truss storm off the stage yesterday when a banner displayed a lettuce with the caption, I crushed the economy? That we did. We both saw it. We both saw it.
I mean, it was brilliant, but she handled it so badly. I mean, look at her face, look at her body language. She should either have got up and walked out immediately, which she's about to do here, but did not do immediately, or she should have gone on the offensive about it. That's what I would have done. I would have said, you may think you're smart doing this, but here's the truth. I did not crash the economy. It was the guy I made the Chancellor of the Exchequer and then sacked, an African guy with an African name. I no longer even remember who he is. I would have gone to town. Kwasi, wasn't it? Kwasi Kwarteng. Is now no longer even a member of parliament. Neither is she.
It looked very clunky, and she was unfortunately dressed in green like the lettuce. This is an email from Matt.
She was wearing a lettuce.
Yeah. She was. She was.
Look
one more. Matt Behan says, I can't stop thinking there is a link with Netanyahu meeting Musk having an interview with Trump, riots in the UK, and the media blaming X and social media, then the Labour and Conservative Party MPs saying they're leaving X en masse. I have felt over the last couple of months that our UK media were trying to stoke unrest and turn the population, or at least fascist, against Muslims. And I do feel this is all linked to Iran. Just saying.
Yeah, well, the neck bone's connected to the shoulder bone's connected to the arm bone, and so on and so on. Everything is connected in one way or another. I'm not in any doubt as to the character of Elon Musk, but X is better under his ownership than it was under the open and overt ownership and control of the deep state in the US and the UK. At least like a stopped clock, Elon Musk is right twice a day. Now, I can't go into it, but as you very well know, I'm suing him in the courts in Dublin. That case is quickly reaching a crescendo, and so I've got no reason to love Elon Musk. But the idea that Labour and Conservative MPs cannot bear to be on X, they can't bear to be on X because record numbers of their constituents are on X and are increasingly holding them to account on X. That's why they really hate X, not because of Elon Musk, not because of the presence on it of sundry head cases and psychotic brutes, but because there are hundreds of millions. In fact, the interview with Trump achieved an audience of more than 1 billion. 1 billion.
Incredible.
That's what they really hate. They hate the existence of a space in which 1 billion people can gather and which is not directly controlled by them. And just like they don't trust Trump because he's not dependable all the time, they don't trust Musk.
Same reason, yes.
Because he's not dependable all the time. Well, I can't take you for chips tonight in your mystery location. I'll take you out for some other kind of food. See you soon after the show. Eve in Florida wants to talk about Kursk. Eve, go ahead.
Hello, yes. First of all, I would like to say that in 2 days, like every year, I will celebrate, like usual, the birthday of my daughter and your birthday. And it's an important birthday that you are going to have.
Happy birthday to her.
So I want.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So what I wanted to say about Kursk is that it's a point that I wanted to make sometime on your show, and which is very important, is that there is a fundamental difference between a piece of land for the West and a piece of land for Russia or for China. A piece of land for the West, they look at the geostrategical position, they look at the raw material, which is under or if it's a very fertile ground, and if they like it, they want to get it. The Russians, in contrary, they always look who is living on that land. That means they look at the people. And what happened with Kursk is the Ukrainians are thinking that they are going to grab 1,000 square kilometers here to exchange for another square 1,000 kilometers there, both of them being occupied by Russians, so both of them having the same value for the Russian. So if they would understand this aspect, they would not have done such a stupid thing. Because there is nothing to exchange for the Russian, it's all Russian land. And what I wanted to say also, which has to do also a little bit with Israel, is that the reason why the West is like that is because the US need to collateralize their dollar because less and less foreign investors are interested in it. So they want to force countries to exchange what they have in dollar. And that's why they want to destroy asset-rich countries like Iran and Russia. And the last thing I wanted to say, if I may, about Israel, I was not planning, but I was listening to your great guest, is that there is one possibility you have forgotten in your list, is that what Iran may be doing is work on a nuclear bomb right now. That's number one. And number two is that Israel doesn't want America to fight Iran directly like that, or they don't want to fight. They want America to nuke the nuclear site of Iran because they cannot do it themselves, because they think that the Russians will not risk St. Petersburg for Iran. So they don't want, the Israeli thinks, okay, if we nuke Iran, they're going to nuke us. But if America nuke Iran, the Russians won't protect them because the Russians will not risk St. Petersburg for Iran. They will let it happen. So that's the point I wanted to make.
Yeah, a very powerful one indeed. And isn't it extraordinary how we've come to a situation where such conversations are now normal? They are not off the wall. They are not unhinged in any way. Will nuclear weapons be used in Kursk? Will they be used in the Donbass? Will they be used in Kiev? Will they be used in Iran? Will they be used in Israel? Will they be used by Israel? What an extraordinary situation we have now reached, where our leaders have led us into a situation where it's possible to imagine nuclear weapons being used in any or all of those theaters of conflict. Last call is from down under, Queensland, Australia. Imad wants to talk about Israel. Imad, you're the last caller. Please have your say, as you've gotten up so early in order to talk to us.
No, I appreciate it, George. Thank you for having me on your show. Firstly, I wanted to, give your thanks to, the standing up for the, right side of history of the Palestinian people and their cause as well, and the victims of the families that have been passing away from this atrocity. I just wanted to just quickly tell you a couple of things. Firstly, very, very quickly, about this, land occupation for a Jewish state. They claim that, the Palestinian land is the land given to them by God 5,000 years ago, and for that reason, that's their land. But a lot of people don't realize that there was a lot of plans. As you know, there was the Uganda plan, there was the Madagascar plan. There was also one here in Australia called the Kimberley plan. I don't know if you've heard of it. It was run by a man named Isaac Steinberg.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so in the late 30s, early 40s, obviously prior to the Holocaust and during the Holocaust, Steinberg from London, believe it or not, came down to Australia into the Kimberley region, which is in northwestern Australia, between the rivers, get this, the Ord River and the Victoria River of northwestern Australia, and tried to buy, in inverted commas, 28,000 square kilometres of land for 75,000 Jews fleeing Europe during and before the Holocaust. Now, the funny thing about this, because we're looking at the polls, obviously, and how people are reacting to certain, questions of what you're giving. The polls for Australians during that time about whether or not we should allow Jewish settlers to come to Australia and take that part of the region, 53% at that time said yes, but 47% was against the plan. And 47%, they said, this is their quotation, that the reason why they didn't want them to come here was the concerns that the settlers would inevitably drift away from the Kimberley region and start migrating to the major regions and cities of Australia, which is exactly what they did in Palestine, right? So they came into Palestine under that impression, but realistically, they were taking the land and they started flooding through the land. So the Prime Minister, John Curtin, at the time, went against it and said that they would not depart from the long-established policy in regards to the alien settlement in Australia and could not entertain the proposal for a group settlement of the exclusive type contemplated by the Free Land League. So I just wanted to get your take on that and what you think about that and, whether or not really this was the land that was supposed to be promised.
I have no take on it because you've educated me about it. I have spent 50 years in this cause and have never heard of that proposal. But it is educational to the whole audience because it again further underscores the absolutely ludicrous nature of the claim that God gave you title to somebody else's land thousands of years ago. First of all, God gave you nothing. The Bible was written by men. The people to whom the promised land was promised were not the people, not even ethnically, never mind actually, the people who then occupied it in 1948. The Jewish people in that region, thousands of years ago, are not the same people as those who later converted to Judaism. And if you think about it, how could they be? A Chinaman can convert to Judaism. An African can convert to Judaism. I could convert to Judaism. In what sense can God have promised me, the African and the Chinaman, the land of Palestine? Stop being so stupid, those of you who parrot that patent absurdity. Secondly, where would the world be if everybody turned up in the place their ancestors used to be and said, get out of that house, clear that land. My ancestor 3,000 years ago lived here, and I'm here to claim his land, his house, his life. I'm here. I've come from halfway around the world. because 3,000 years ago, my ancestor was here. Most of the Israelis are Ashkenazi Jews. The Ashkenazi people are indisputably European people. Physiologically, their physiognomy, their faces, their names, their history, their customs are all from Europe. They were, for sure, the subject of pogrom, of bigotry, of hatred, and ultimately of the Holocaust. But not by the Arabs, certainly not by the Palestinians. I'll be honest with you, I wish they'd gone to northwestern Australia. There's plenty of land, and the Australian government fully supports the idea of a Zionist state. So why not have it in the northwest, down under? Why not, indeed? Imad, thank you for that extraordinary call. I have now gone 6 whole minutes over my allotted time, and I've got to take my good wife in a mystery location out for a mystery dinner. And therefore, I'll have to say a belated good night. But I'll be back, God willing, on Sunday for the mothership, for the mother of all talk shows. Please don't congratulate me on my birthday. I am utterly horrified to be 70 years old, and I'd appreciate it if nobody reminds me of it. Good night.